It's Tech Tuesday. We got Jason Doty in the house. All right, we're going to go chapter 2. And we got David Englehart. He's the man. 206. All right. All right. Are you ready? We got Jason Doty in the house. Tech Tuesday. David Englehart and Laurel. We got research in the house. Chapter 2. And Michael, the one and only Michael Hofkin. Felix, we've got Columbia represented, and I've been playing with my espresso machine. Loving the coffee. That's why I'm wired. All right, let's talk chapter 2. So hopefully you all have your copy of or your license for NFPA Link, that magical piece of software that just is the gift that keeps on giving. And I need to plug my power into my fin. Michael Hoffman, enjoying the snow. Yes, I am. You know what, Michael? It has been so cold that it hasn't melted. I'm sure you have the same problem. So we got about 18 inches outside, and we had to dig trenches for Maggie so she can go out and do her business. But we are surviving. I like the snow, but I like a period of snow, and then I want to go straight to summer, then fall, snow, summer, fall. I don't like the spring. I am not a spring person. All right, so chapter 2 is wiring and protection. It is still wiring and protection. And we have, let's do this. If we, cam A monitor left. Hey, it worked. All right, so we have use and identification of grounded conductors in Article 200. So that's your grounded conductor. Commonly known, some people just call it the neutral, but it's technically the grounded conductor because it may not be the neutral. Nihad El Sharif. I know it's been a while, Nihad, and we still haven't connected. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. Article 206, non-power limited remote control and signaling circuits. We've got branch circuits in 210, 215 is feeders. Now, keep in mind that 215 is feeders, but it's not medium voltage feeders because that is Article 266. So what you're going to notice in here is that you've got Article 266 for feeders over 1,000 volts AC, 1,500 volts DC. We've got outside branch circuits and feeders over 1,000 volts AC and 1,500 volts DC. That's in 267. Then you have 268, which is services. And then you got your grounding and bonding. So look at these 4 articles. And if you remember, I think it was 235. I think. I'd have to go back in NFPA Link and look at last cycle, but I think it was 235. And it was colder than Saskatoon, Neon. It was colder than Saskatoon. Anyway, so you'll notice that they broke out, and then there's 245. So I wish they would have done like 255, 265, 266, 267, 268, and 270, kept all of the overvoltage together. But they made 245 because it was 240 and we made 245. But remember, we separated out. I'm going to flex the power of NFPA Link. So what you do is you right mouse click up here and you open it in a new window. And then when you come over here, look at this. I've got the 2026 edition. I can go to the 2023 edition. and I can go to 2, and it is 235. So there it is. So there's 235. And if you recall, what we did in 235 was we had branch circuits, feeders, and services in one article. And what they did in 2026 was they broke out the medium voltage branch circuits. They gave it its own article 265, feeders its own article in 266. This is all high voltage, not medium voltage. I got to quit saying medium voltage. In fact, you're going to watch a video I did with Antonello. I'm not going to try his last name. He's from Italy, and I did this video for at my last Current OS meeting when I was in Lisbon last week. And I said on that video, and you got to watch it because I was like, there's medium voltage DC at 800 volts. And then he was like, Dom, I believe that's low voltage to me. I'm like, crap, I screwed up. And it's on record. So I screwed up, and it's recorded. You've got to watch it. Man. But I did a good recovery. You'll notice I did a recovery because I was in my mind thinking medium voltage solid state transformers, and then I was talking 800 volts. But you're going to love my recovery. It's going to be good. Anyway, 245, 265, 66, 67, 68, and then 270 is grounding and bonding. So what you're seeing is that we are moving and rearranging as we speak the National Electrical Code. We're coming into a huge restructuring. Medium voltage was low-hanging fruit and a focus. So medium voltage equipment, medium voltage grounding and bonding, branch circuits, they broke those out, put those all into their own articles, and there's going to be a lot to come moving forward. So Laurel, thank you, did a confirmation in 2023, 235, absolutely. Limited energy, yes. So limited energy, I think, David, I think that the limited energy stuff for Runos is in chapter 7. I'm looking. I think it is it. I want to say, yeah, it's and you'll see articles. So what they did in this cycle is they removed that independence of chapter 8. I have to be careful because I'm trying to think if that is a 2029. Are we working on task group work that's doing that? No, I'm almost positive we did. We moved a lot of stuff out of chapter 8, and we moved it into chapter 7. And your power limited stuff did grow with the class 4 wiring and class 4 power systems. Yep. So anyway, chapter 2. Let's do this. I'm going to, and keep in mind that you can go to the IAEI's website and download and purchase the book, The Analysis of Changes, the one, the only. And you can also get the PowerPoint. So don't be shy. Don't be shy. Especially if you are presenting and sharing information and knowledge, leverage your membership and get that. Yeah, you're right. It's limited energy instead of low voltage. That's right. It's limited energy. Very good point, David. Very good. Very good. All right. And Jason, yeah. There's one tomorrow, which is Antonello. And I'm not sure if I think it's Thursday for Yannick. And Yannick is president. So Antonello is leading the technical changes, and Yannick is leading the organization of Current OS. So, should have's moved Article 245 to 260. Yeah, I'm with you, David. And what you're getting to is this, you're getting to this 245 right here. And if we would have just moved that up, then all of these would have been grouped together, would have been really nice. And then you have your non-power limited remote control and signaling circuits. That's another, I believe, a new article in 206, but they just moved that, and it's a real short article. All right, Josh the Sparky is in the house. Okay, so let's do this. I am going to take a look at, now 206, we already said that's a non-power limited remote control and signaling circuits. That's a new article. They were previously on 300.6. So what you're going to see, so this is what you're going to see. Slideshow, set it up. I think I'm good. All right, so here's the thing. What they did, because of the one last little sip. It's so good. Because of how they're moving things around, you're going to see a new article like we are seeing in Article 206. But the reality of the fact is they're moving things. So they're saying, look, trying to put things in the right buckets. They're saying, look, some of this is inside of an article, really doesn't belong here. Let's move this and put this over here. And they're playing sort of the shell game. So it may look like there's a new requirement, but the IAEI changes book has, I think, done a pretty good job of identifying these things and saying, look, here's a change. Here's a new article, but these requirements were previously located in 300.26. And if you look, I loved when they made this 206 non-power limited circuits, because it is literally an article with a scope, 206.1, and one section. 206.4 talks about installation and for non-power limited remote control and signaling circuits. So we have an entire article which is basically outside of the scope, one section of the code, which they moved from a different area. But keep in mind that we're shifting gears, all right? And we're coming into a turn. So there's going to be some things shifting that may look kind of odd, but then when we hit next cycle and when you see the second draft or the first draft, I think they will publish the comments that you're making are on the previous edition of the code. But when you see after the first draft meetings and we publish the first draft results, I believe, I'm almost positive, I'm almost definitely, absolutely sure, partially, maybe, that NFPA is going to publish the new arrangement. So that second draft, we're going to comment on the new format. And when you see the new format, the new layout, the new 20-some articles and multiple chapters, 20-some chapters, actually, not articles. There's much more articles. When you see these chapters laid out and things moved around, you'll start to understand what's going on this cycle and a little bit last cycle. So we're in this journey. We're gearing down. We're shifting gears. We're going to be making a turn. I don't know if it's a left turn or a right turn. It's definitely not a smooth little transition. It's going to be a hard right or a hard left, one of the two. And then I think you're going to start to see how things are going to come together. All right. And if you look in the back of the book, informative annex L is the proposed organization of the 2029 electrical code. Now, It's not set in stone. If you have comments on the proposed organization, I believe you can go to, let's do this. I know I'm supposed to be talking about chapter 2. So let's go back to chapter 2. I'm squirrel. Don't want to squirrel. Okay. So 206. Now let's take a look at 210. I am going to try to find some of the key things that changed. I'm not going to go through everything because just for sake of time, you can go by the book or the presentation or attend an IAEI meeting and get the analysis of changes. For goodness sakes. Here, this is an important one. 210.8. Bam. 210.8 has informational note number 2. All right, and I'm sure I covered this at some point in the past. Informational note number 2 is related to the HF, high frequency. Now the HF plus, the changes to UL 943 for HF plus did not pass the mustard. They didn't pass the committee. Now, a manufacturer can make an HF plus. It will still pass. So the way I would explain it is the HF plus is more restrictive than the HF. So the HF version of the GFCI, and I won't say version, what would I call it? It's a type. It's very similar. This is very similar to having a receptacle that has a TR or a WR, weather resistant, or tamper resistant. It's still a receptacle. A GFCI marked HF is still a GFCI. If I put a receptacle in this room that had a WR on it, I would not be violating the National Electrical Code. I don't need a weather-resistant receptacle in this room. But the fact that it's labeled WR doesn't mean that I'm violating the National Electrical Code, because the requirement is that I need a receptacle. So the fundamental rule is it is a receptacle. The same thing here. The fundamental rule is you need a GFCI. Whether that GFCI has an HF on it or not doesn't matter. And this is the significance of that. And you've got to wrap your head around that. You've got to understand it. And here's why. If you have an application today, let's say that all however many manufacturers come out with a GFCI device that has an HF on it. It's still a UL 943 GFCI, and it has HF. And you did not enter into the 2026 National Electrical Code yet. You can still apply that device in your circuit because it's still a GFCI. The fact that it's also labeled HF is no different than a receptacle that's also labeled WR or also labeled TR. I can use a tamper-resistant receptacle in my attic, in places where it's not required by the code, because it exceeds the fundamental requirement. So hence, and the reason I'm stressing that is because I've gotten this question. I've gotten this question a lot. All right. Every time it comes up, I mean, when I'm doing code changes, it inevitably someone says, wait a second, it's not required. It's a informational note that's not enforceable. Right, it's an informational note. And all the informational note is telling you is that, hey, there is also an HF. Now it has HF plus, but you're not going to find any of those. Why? Because it didn't pass the standard. So you will see HF marked on circuit breakers, possibly receptacles. But that doesn't remove the fact that it's a GFCI. The fundamental rule is you're required to have a GFCI. The icing on the cake is it can also be an HF. And so when you look at the requirement in the National Electrical Code in 210.8, you'll see that informational note. It doesn't prohibit the installation of HF, even without that informational note. So it's just an awareness thing, which means if you're on an earlier edition and you see an HF GFCI out there, it's not a violation of the code. You're allowed to use it. There's no prohibition. It's still a GFCI. All right, I know I want to emphasize that because you would not believe the questions I get on that one. I get emails on it too. So, wow, that moved and I didn't even touch it. 210.8 receptacles. Oh, so here's the other thing that we did. Last cycle we started this. Remember, in earlier editions of the code, there were exceptions. And I'll give you one of the exceptions. One of them was for a burglar alarm system. I think that's what they called it. We got rid of the word burglar alarm because every time I hear of a burglar alarm, I think of the Hamburglar. When I think of the Hamburglars, I think of hamburgers. And the next thing you know, I gained 2 pounds. So we got rid of burglar, and I think we call it a security system, not a burglar alarm system. Something like that. But in any case, what we recognized was you had an exception for the burglar alarm system when it was in the basement. But we've expanded GFCIs to laundries and other areas of the dwelling unit to a point where it's not because of the room. It's not the location. It's the equipment. It's the fact that it's a burglar alarm system, a fire alarm system. It's the fact that it is a... what's the other one? There was another one too in there. There were 2. One was a fire alarm, and there was chapter 7 stuff. Security system. Thank you, Jason. A security system, right? So there's the security system, and then there was another one. Jason, I cannot remember what the other one was, and I could go to NFPA link, but I'm not going to because my point is, we ask the fundamental question: why are we saying it only when it's in a basement? What about Texas? They don't have basements in Texas. There are no basements in some of the floor. I mean, if your house is at or below the water level, the water, whatever you want to call that table, you got problems. You don't have exceptions, even if you have a burglar system or a fire alarm system. Fire alarm system and security system. That's what it was. Fire alarm and security. So we realized it's not room dependent, but system dependent. I don't care where you have that security system or fire alarm system. I don't care where it's at. We just don't want it on a GFCI or an AFCI, or in this case, a GFCI, 210.8 exception. So we moved the exceptions to the parent language. So we said, look, it doesn't matter where you're at. This is an exception not to an area, but to the entire section of 210.8. Well, there was an exception for receptacles on the rooftops for other than dwelling units. We didn't have that for a dwelling unit. So if you had a dwelling unit, like the one in this picture, which is a flat roof, and you had a receptacle up there, you didn't have the same exception that was in other than dwelling units, although the situation could still occur. So we said that didn't make sense. So we cleaned up the exceptions in 210.8, which basically expanded the exceptions, but for a daggone good reason, in my opinion. All right, let's take a look. David Engelhart. I see a long one. Some mistake access control with security systems that have to comply with certain building code requirements in Chapter 10 of the Building Code. Delayed egress as well. Oh, man. That's a That's a good point. And you know what, David? So here's the thing. Here is the thing. And I know sometimes I can be a real stickler, but I was just on a phone call this morning, and the phone call was Open Compute Project. If you haven't heard of it, there is an effort called it's the acronym is OCP, and I think if you just Google OCP or Open Compute Project, you'll find the links. It's like a Wikipedia for data centers and whatnot. You guys and gals may want to look it up and possibly join in on some of the task groups if possible and contribute. I don't know if there's a for pay. I don't know the answer to that question. If you have to pay to engage or if it's a membership driven thing, check it out. It's worth a visit. But on that call today, we were building a codes and standards document, and Lisa Grams from UL Solutions is the chair for that. And a comment was made about, and there's dialogue in the book or in the document that we're creating about a solid state transformer. Now, you and I both know if I say a solid state transformer, you're going to want to go to Article 450. Well, that's not the case because it's listed to a standard that addresses solid state power supplies. So on that call, I made the statement. I said, look, we're calling it a solid state transformer, but we need to call it what it is and how it's listed, which is a solid state, medium voltage solid state power supply. It's not a transformer. If I say transformer, it brings in implications. So clarity is really important. And to your point, access control, security systems, the terminology that we use is the gateway to the code. I'm telling you, I bet you I gotta like copyright that. The definitions are the gateway to the code. So if I call something a transformer, I'm going to go to 450. If I call it a fire alarm system, continue without streaming independent alliance. Facebook. So welcome. Sorry about that, Facebook people. I must have a limitation on the time I can stream to Facebook because they cut me off. So in any case, terminology is important. I stressed it over there, and there was one individual who said, "Hey, look, we call it a solid state transformer in the field. This is the industry recognized term." Well, that's fine, but it doesn't align with the National Electrical Code installation requirements terminology. So if when we use our terms, we've got to use them correctly. That will make sure that we're covered. The general intent is that you do not block people inside a burning building. Exactly. I agree 100% with you. All right. So that's what we did in 210.8, receptacles. Okay, so then what we did, oh, my neck is killing me. Then what we did, I'm going to grab my book because hopefully all of you, watch this, watch. See this? Right, that's my glasses. Hopefully all of you have your edition of the 2026 code book, and you can go to 210.8, which is on page 70.9. A is dwelling units. Remember, A deals with receptacle outlets. It's receptacle outlets. It's not lighting outlets. It's not hardwired equipment. 210.8A, dwelling unit receptacle outlets. And it's all 125 volt through 250 volt receptacles that are in these identified locations. So it doesn't matter the ampere rating. It could be a 15, a 20, a 10, a 60, an 80, 100, whatever it is. It's all receptacles. Installed, it's got to be 125 volt through 250 volt. So that covers the stove receptacles, things like that. And if you are one of those high-powered coffee drinkers, if you've got a 240 volt espresso machine, I'm coming to your house and we're having a cup of Java together. So what we did, we broke out, and I think this is critical. We broke out 210.8a, we got bathrooms, and remember, we used to have, there was one line item that said garages and accessory buildings, blah, 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 blah. And there was some text in there that said that have a floor located at or below grade level, right? So we would get, hey, Steve just got off a roof. Hopefully you got off via the ladder and not whew, boom. Anyway, so there was, I used to get questions on, does the floor located at or below grade level apply to only the accessory building or the garage, just because of the way it was written? And we said, you know what, we're going to get rid of it, because the electrical hazard doesn't go away just because your floor is above grade level or at grade level. Oh, it says at or below grade level. So if it's above grade level, if you step up, if you put a 1-inch lip and you're up from grade level, it doesn't mean the hazard has gone away, right? So we took that language out and we separated in by the style manual. You're required by the style manual to make sure that each of these items has its own thing. You can't load a bunch of lists inside of one list item. So we separated these out into their own individual lists. It adds clarity. It increases the list. I mean, now we got 14 items. Like, for example, the last item used to say indoor damp and wet locations. And then we said, well, no, it can't be and, because it can't have an indoor damp, a location can't be damp and wet. It's either going to be damp or wet. So we had to fix that. And then we said, you know what, forget about the ands and the ors. Let's just separate those two into their own list items. Talk about a genius right there, because we just said, forget about the ands and the ors. So that's what we did throughout this whole section, first level subdivision. Got rid of the multiple items in one list, adds clarity, makes it easier to enforce. Now, but 2 says garages. It's not just garages that are at or below grade level. It's any garage. It also says areas of accessory buildings not intended as habitable rooms and limited to storage, work, and similar uses. Not only those that are at or below grade level. Make sense? All right. Crawl spaces, at or below grade level. Kitchens. So we got the crawl spaces at or below grade levels, but I'd argue the at or below grade level, it got to come out of there too, because the hazard in a crawl space is not because it's at or below grade level. You're in a freaking crawl space. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so we weren't consistent. But you know what that is? That's job security for next code cycle. All right, then you got kitchens, and then we had, so remember what we did in before, we separated this out before because we had kitchens and areas with, or areas with. And you could argue, wait a second, aren't they? So we just said kitchens, and then we added another item that says areas with sinks and permanent provisions for food prep, beverage prep, or cooking. That aligns with what was in 210.8b, because it was over there. And we said, well, I could still have the same area in 210 in dwelling units. We have sinks where receptacles are installed within 6 foot. I don't believe that's a new at all. Boathouses is not new. Bathtubs or shower stalls, that's not new. Laundry areas is not new. So, and then 13 and 14, because we renumbered those, is probably why they shaded them. 13 and 14, we have indoor damp locations. And then in 14, we have indoor wet locations. We got rid of the whole debate of is it or is it and. So we just eliminated the word altogether. I mean, that solves the problems. We usually, when people put a public input in and say, you know, I don't like this word or that word, and we say, okay, let's just get rid of it. In this case, we didn't expand anything. That was all we did in A. I mean, and then I guess the other thing we did was in the exceptions, in exception number 2, We did the GFCI protection should not be required for, so we just modified the exceptions a slight bit to align with the style manual. Not a biggie. Other than dwelling units, what did we do there? We did the same thing with indoor damp and wet locations, right? So that's list item 8 and 9. We also, 14. 14 is a, take a look at list item 14. What did it used to say? What did 210.8 used to say? 210.8B, bravo, 210.8B. It used to say aquariums, bait wells, and similar open aquatic vessels or containers, such as tanks or bowls. This is the 2023. And then what we changed it to is open aquatic vessels or containers, such as aquariums, bait wells, and similar tanks or bowls. So I don't know that we changed the meaning. I remember DJ was adamant about that. We said aquariums, bait wells, and similar open aquatic vessels or containers, such as tanks or bowls. And we changed it to open aquatic vessels or containers, such as aquariums, bait wells, and similar. Whew. Maybe it was just a English thing. I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking it was. And I think that was the big changes. I would say the big change. Let me look. 210.8. Hold on. I think that was the big. I think the big change in B. I'm just making sure. Locker rooms. Do we have locker rooms? I think we did have locker rooms. Yeah, we did. We had unfinished basements, open laundry areas, bathtubs, or shower stalls. We had all of that. So the big change in B, other than dwelling units, is the industrial exception number 2. Okay. I'm going to show you exception number 2, and I'll show you the problem that we had. So if you look at exception number 2, we say, I'm sorry, it was exception number 3. It said receptacles or cord and plug connected fixed and stationary appliances installed within 6 foot of the top inside edge of a bowl of a sink shall not be required to be GFCI protected in industrial establishments, blah, blah, blah. So let's break this down. And it was during our task group meeting that I don't know who it was, read this and said, if I just forget about the cord and plug connected fixed and stationary appliances, receptacles installed within 6 foot from the top inside edge of a bowl of a sink shall not be required to be GFCI protected in industrial establishments where the conditions of maintenance and supervisions, blah, 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 and a short equipment grounding program in accordance with it shall be permitted, not required. So the issue was, they said, hold on. If I have a receptacle within 6 foot of a sink, I don't need the GFCI protected in an industrial establishment. And I'm not required to have an assured equipment grounding conductor program. That removes GFCIs from a lot of receptacles. And so what we did was, in the task group, we said, hold on, what did it say before? So if you go back to 210.8 in the 2020 code, 210.8 2020 B exception, Here is what it said before. Here's what it was. Here's where it was. Let me show you something. Here's where it was. It was an exception to the outdoors. Exception number 2 to 4, outdoors. In industrial establishments only, where the conditions of maintenance in a short equipment grounding conductor program specified shall be permitted, it's still permitted, not required, for those receptacle outlets used to supply equipment that would create a greater hazard. Well, it's not all receptacles, right? It was only for those outside receptacles, and only when those receptacles supply equipment that would create a greater hazard if it lost power. Somehow, last cycle, we made it generic. No receptacle within the top inside edge of a sink within 6 feet. That was not our intent. That was never on the task group. I don't know how the heck that happened. I did not take the time to go through all of my notes on panel 2, but it happened. So what we did this cycle is we went back. We went back in time. All right. And you got to read exception number 2 because it is a good change. It says at industrial establishments where conditions of maintenance and supervision ensure that only qualified people are involved, if a greater hazard is created by power interruption to outdoor fixed and stationary cord and plug connected equipment, or that has a design that is not compatible with GFCI protection, we're limited now to outdoor, and a short equipment grounding conductor program in accordance with shall be implemented, not permitted, it's now required, and enforced in lieu of GFCI protection provided at the receptacle outlet. So we did a couple things. We said it has to be outdoors. We went back to the 2020 language and made it, basically reworded it to align with the style manual. And we made the assured equipment grounding program a requirement. If you're not going to put GFCI, then you want an assured equipment grounding program. It's not just permitted, it's required. That is a significant change, in my opinion, and a shift. And if you're on the 2023 code, I don't know of any industrial that would implement the way it was written, simply because typically your industrial establishments have to think about OSHA regulations and things like that. So they probably would never do they would never follow that exception that we put in there. But because typically in those applications, they go above and beyond when it comes to that. But in any case, we had to fix that language. And we did. So that's what we did in 210.8b. Make sense? 210.8d. So you'll notice that in the 2026 edition, we still have the 210.8d section specific appliances. We have been going back and forth with Purview and trying to figure out the purview on this. And I can tell you where some people say, on one side, they'll say, look, you can't include an appliance in Article 210 because appliances are covered in 422. So there should be no appliance requirements in 210.8. And they want that removed, and they want the Article 422, which governs appliances, to include the GFCI requirements for appliances. The other school of thought is that the 210 people say, no, we want this in here because we are using appliances to identify the branch circuit. It's not an appliance requirement, it's a branch circuit requirement. And just for the same reasons that we use the receptacle to identify which branch circuit needs to have GFCI protection, it's not a receptacle requirement, meaning it wouldn't be moved to 406. We're using the appliances to identify the branch circuit, because we don't want to say all outlets. We're saying, look, an outlet that supplies an automotive vacuum machine, a drinking water cooler, a high pressure spray washing machine, a tire inflation machine, those branch circuits are required to have GFCI protection in it, so that regardless of the vintage of appliance, you are GFCI protected. So that's the other school of thought. So there's two schools of thought, and the battle that's going on is, you get the tug. It's like a tug of war thing. It goes over this way. Oh yeah, no, we're going to remove all of the GFCI requirements out of 210.8 and put it over in 422, and then someone says, oh, hold on, no, we're just using that to identify which branch circuit, and then it goes back over this way. God only knows where it's going to go next cycle, but I'm telling you that the battle and the struggle is real, and it's not going away. So, Jason, the list of items in 23 cycle was helpful, but I get the CMP2 doesn't control the list. Yeah. So that's where we came up with like an agreement that said, all right, we're not going to control the list. We'll let 422 control the list. Now the challenge is, because 210.8 panel 2 deals with shock protection, we get the public inputs around expanding. And in fact, we added 4 items last cycle or the cycle before, because of the Consumer Product Safety Commission identifying electrical shock hazards and people dying on wall-mounted ovens, counter-mounted cooking units, clothes dryers, and microwaves. So we added those to the list. We had that discussion at panel 2. That discussion did not occur at panel 16 for appliances. Now, they did not have that exposure to the shock hazards. They didn't do that homework either to say, I don't even think there's anybody from the Consumer Product Safety Commission on 422. Let me look that up. www.nfpa.org/70 next. And I don't know if I'm logged in or not. I'm not logged in, so this is a good thing. So I'm going to show you. If I just go to the next edition and you go to Technical Committee, and if you go to CMP 16 and view committee members, this is all public information. So I can search here for CPSC, Control F, CPSC. There's nobody on there. Now, if I go to panel 2, and do a Control F, CPSC, boom, I get 2 non-voting members, Doug Lee and Einstein Miller. So the value that panel 2 has is they have the consumer input to shock protection, and they're very vocal. Doug Lee was very instrumental in the hazards around countertops and kitchen tops and whatnot, and this whole thing on shock protection was really a CPSC thing, because we had one of the panel members ask the question, what are the hazards on these appliances? And then Doug Lee did a beautiful thing. He didn't give them the data. He taught that individual how to fish, gave them the tools to go out to the CPSC database and search on their own. And then they came back to the task group and said, whoa, I did this research, and look what I found. There are deaths, electrocutions on cooktops and ovens and microwaves. And then we added those because we had the substantiation. Panel 16 does not have the value of having the general public recognized. CMP 17. Thank you. CMP 17. And you know how you know that? And I should have looked that up. I'll tell you how you know that. You can leverage this, and under the technical committee, you can do scope and responsibility, and you'll see I screwed up with 16 because 16 is low voltage stuff. That's your 720s, that's your 800, but 17 is 422. So it's right there. Thank you, David, for that correction. And hopefully we just taught some more people how to fish, because I should have looked that up. I always screw that up. 16 and 17, I get screwed up. 16 is low voltage, 17 is appliances. All right, so that's been the struggle back and forth, and we'll see what happens this next cycle. But I don't know where it'll end up. I have my opinions, but we'll see what happens. All right, so 210.8b, we already talked about. We already talked about the appliance debate. Now let's talk about the ground fault protection. Yeah, Josh the Sparky, you're right. That is a very good point, that you can learn so much going to the NFPA site. You can go to the public inputs, the first draft and second draft. You can take a look at what the public inputs were that passed and which ones failed, and look at why. Because anything that is accepted or rejected has to have a panel statement associated with it. And that gives you sort of where the head. Now, you might see doesn't add clarity, which I think is a cop-out. But that is what it is. All right. So anyway. Let's go back. So on 210.8F, they increased the threshold from 50 to 60 amps for a single phase branch circuit that is rated 150 volts or less to ground. They also added permission for a Class C GFCI. Now, it's called a special purpose GFCI, but Ryan Jackson is chairing a task group for the correlating committee, and the way that task group is going is to basically lose that terminology of the special purpose GFCI and simply use the terms Class C GFCI, because it's a Class C GFCI. Class A GFCI is what we know as a standard GFCI, and then there's a Class D GFCI and then a Class E GFCI. So but here is permitted to be used a Class C GFCI protection for HVAC equipment. There's no expiration date that's given. There is, again, an informational note that tells you, hey, if that Class C GFCI, which is listed to UL 943C, is marked HF, bada bing, bada boom, bada bang, it's still a Class C GFCI, so it can be used. Right? And it's an informational note for the same reasons that we said before. What else? 210.8F. 210.8F. We said the date is in there still for listed HVAC equipment that has the exception, and it will expire September 1st, 2026. So they did not renew or extend the expiration date. And I think that was it. That's the big stuff on on 210.8F, and you all know the debates that have been occurring. So and the debates have always been around. The debates have always been around, and we're not going to get past 210.8, which I didn't think we would. But in any case, the debates on 210.8F, and I would say appliances, has been around compatibility. The challenge has been that use of the equipment grounding conductor for current. 250 tells us do not put currents on the equipment grounding conductor. They call them objectionable currents. There are reasons for that. Compatibility with GFCI is one of those reasons. Now, typically, and I say typically, whoop, I got snow falling off the roof. It's starting to get warm outside, must be. Typically, the current over the equipment grounding conductor has been high frequency, which is why you have an HF mark on GFCIs. And you had the changes to UL 943 to permit listing a product where it ignores or it handles high frequency ground faults differently than 60 hertz ground fault currents. So you had this change to 943 to address that, and now we're seeing more variable frequency drives and similar, I'll say variable frequency drives, on a lot of this equipment, including refrigerators and things of that nature. Outdoor outlets, the compatibility concerns are typically around HVAC. That's the biggest complaint. The other one I would say is electric vehicle charging equipment. Now, if you have this is another big misconception. Oh man, another misconception. I love this one. 625, Article 625 handles electric vehicle charging equipment. And I've heard some people say because in 625 they were going to make modifications to provide some relief on hardwired electric vehicle charging equipment. They were going to provide some relief in that area. Because so what 625 did, it was appealed and they removed everything. So now you're left with what was in the previous edition of the code, the 2023 code, which just says electric vehicle charging equipment that's cord and plug connected has to be GFCI protected. Doesn't say anything about hardwired. So I've heard some people say, oh, hardwired is not required to be GFCI protected. And that is not correct. 625 has a requirement for cord and plug connected. An absence of any language that says 210.8F does not apply. Absence of that means 210.8F does apply. If 625 would have made the changes that they were proposing, which would have permitted a special purpose Class C GFCI, or actually it said special purpose, so it would have been a Class C, D, or E. Any one of those would have been permitted, and the HF. Because they did not do that, you're left with 210.8F, and the only load that I can use a Class C special purpose GFCI on is HVAC. I can't use it on electric vehicle charging equipment. So if I have a hardwired electric vehicle charging equipment, I can't use a Class C. It's got to be a GFCI. So, back on the roof, brought the phone with me. The VFD. Oh, I love this. Hold on. What's he saying? Back on the roof, brought the phone with me. The VFD and HF Plus discussion is needed as this is new stuff for many, should help with nuisance tripping. I agree 100%, Steve. And here's the thing. Now we have options. And that's what I was really, I tried to emphasize in 625. I'm not on that code panel. That is code panel 12, I believe. David, correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, 625.54, Laurel says all receptacles installed, blah, blah, blah. So it's 625.54 is going to tell you cord and plug connected. But because it doesn't say anything about hardwired, that means you're still in 210.8F. Now, if I hardwire in my garage, then I don't need a GFCI because the garage requirement in, say, a dwelling unit is receptacles. That's in 210.8A and B. It's just receptacles in a garage. 210.8F applies to outdoor outlets. So if I have an outdoor vehicle charger, and it's 60 amps, single phase, or less to ground, and then I think there is a Let me go. Let me show you something. Let me come back over 210.8F. It says for dwellings, all outdoor outlets other than those covered in 210.8A, including outdoor outlets installed at the following locations, single phase branch circuits, blah, 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 shall be GFCI protected. So I still have this requirement for single phase branch circuits rated 150 volts or less to ground, 60 amps or less. Those have to be GFCI protected. There's nothing in here for three phase. Right. So Laurel, you're right, and it's important for everybody to, I think, to see that. Anyway, Steve doing it for the love of the game, Josh. Yes. Stay safe, Steve. Yes, please. Enjoy the discussion. Yep, we're at 1:00 and I do have to go for another meeting. Yes, thank you, Josh, the Sparky. You are the man. We do what we can with what we got, and what we got ain't much. So, yes, it does correspond with 210.8A2. And Laurel, again, if it's hardwired and in the garage, then you don't. If it's hardwired outside, then you do, as long as it's on dwellings, outdoor outlets, other than those covered in 210.8A. Exception number 1. All right. All right, everybody, listen. I really appreciate you all dialing in. Great discussion. Loved it. Never going to hate it. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for what you do for electrical safety. Steve, stay safe on that roof. Hopefully you got a harness. Take care, everybody. Michael Hofkin in the house. Enjoy your week. Thank you, Michael. Take care. Stay safe. And please stay healthy. See you next week. Adios. Arrivederci. God bless.